Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Mona Sobhani. And she's here to share with us her new book, Proof of Spiritual Phenomena, a neuroscientist's discovery of the ineffable mysteries of the universe. So welcome to the show, Mona Sobhani.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And your background, I find so intriguing. Through your earlier years, your life was all about science, and that's really what you believed in. How did you make this transformation to becoming a spiritual speaker? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, that's what I write about in the book. It definitely wasn't planned. It was a surprise to me as well. And I was I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, so I was not that all of them are, but I was very anti-spiritual, anti-religious I like to think of it as like the old me. And it was just through a series of life events that I wasn't even really aware of spirituality. I didn't even know what the word meant. I wasn't familiar with frameworks or anything. So it was just through a series of events that it kind of came into my conscious awareness, which is how I think of it now, and forced me to pay attention to it. And when I did, yeah, I actually found it to be pretty valuable. And we can get into it. I don't have to tell the whole story now, unless you want me to, but I started doing kind of deeper research into, is there any proof of spiritual phenomena? Is there any, which I know mostly based, the mainstream kind of makes it seem like there isn't, and it's all faith based. But as a scientist, I was just kind of curious, just kind of curious. So I went on a little quest for myself to investigate.
Well, I think you did what any good scientist does, and is allow that curiosity to ask those questions so you can start diving into a topic.
Yeah, exactly. I just let my curiosity lead the way, and then just kind of looked for evidence and tried to keep an open mind, which can actually be pretty hard once you've been sort of indoctrinated into the not the scientific method, but into mainstream science thinking. You tend to be a little more skeptical, and you accept these general beliefs that everyone seems to agree on. And usually you're too busy to think about these things or investigate things that are outside of the purview of your own research. But that's what happened with me. I was just kind of forced to make time in my life for it, to look into it.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because this is such a phenomenal book. And it has me thinking, being a cognitive neuroscientist, how hard was it for you to write this book?
um, was it hard? No, it actually really it it kind of poured out of me. I'm kind of a very intense person. So if I get interested in something, it's like all my attention and passion goes into it, and it becomes the center of my focus and my world for a period of time. And I'll just put all my energy into it. And that's what happened with this entire personal investigative quest. That originally I wasn't looking to turn this into a book. It was really just for myself. And I ended up interviewing people, taking notes. And when I decided to write it all up, it was really just to help me pull everything together, make sense of it, think things through, and typed up my interview notes, added some research to supplement it, to help me think it through. And then suddenly, it kind of turned into a book. And it was just a period of maybe 2.5 months of very intense, like waking up extremely early before my day job to read and write and think. So it was like very intense 2.5 months of just getting it all out there. So it was actually a pleasure to write.
Well, that's so good to hear. I know when people walk in both worlds, the science and the spirituality, sometimes I hear that that can be a real challenge because, we're forced to take things as the reality as they are, but also have that faith in the spiritual part that we're also seeing.
Yeah, and it is difficult. And I mean, the journey was difficult. Writing the book was, the actual writing was fun, but the journey was really, really difficult for me. And that's what I put into the book. I wanted to capture that because I found a lot of evidence in books that would summarize information and scientific studies on things that mainstream science doesn't pay attention to, like psychic phenomena or near-death experiences, the reincarnation work. At the University of Virginia, they have some of that going on there. So I found a lot of books summarizing all this scientific evidence. But what I was struggling with was, how do I make sense of this? It doesn't match my worldview, which my worldview was scientific materialism, believing the world is, comprised of physical matter. Everything is made, is physical, and anything you can't, see and touch and measure doesn't exist. So that was my worldview. So finding all of this evidence didn't really fit into that worldview. And I had a crisis. And I just went back and forth a lot because my whole, ego and identity was built around this. I'm a scientist. I'm rational, logical. I don't believe in these things that I think are, frankly, I thought they were stupid. And then now I'm faced with, this personal experience and these things that I'm reading and all these other really smart people I encountered that, would tell me their own crazy experiences. And so I was just kind of stuck with these two worlds colliding, and it did spin me into crisis, I was already in an existential crisis sort of, and then it just spun me into an identity crisis. And so I wanted to capture that in the book because I didn't find a lot of that. Like I was like, how do people reconcile these worlds in their mind? Like if you're a scientist, how, because I met so many of scientists who would tell me their stories, who were doing this research. And I was just like, how do you, I just kind of asked them, like, how do you reconcile this? And a lot of them admitted it was difficult too, but that's what I wanted to capture in the book also was the struggle for me, which it was pretty intense and difficult. And it's a long journey. I'm probably still on it. It'll probably be going on for a while still.
I think it's a lifelong journey, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness. Well, I understand. I mean, as a businesswoman, we have to be present and we have to look at things a certain way. And then there's this really strong spiritual side for me. And so there is this like dichotomy where I'm kind of bouncing between both worlds or sometimes walking between both of them at the same time.
Yeah. And it is challenging. It really is. So it's nice to talk about it with other people, find comfort kind of in the camaraderie of it. So that's been very nice.
So why don't we just dive into it? So what even triggered your
Yeah.
spirituality walk?
Let's back up. So like I said, I was very anti-spirituality, anti-religion. I was just a very hard-nosed, skeptical scientist. I had, very formal academic training, and I'm still a scientist. I'm still a neuroscientist. And what happened was though that I'm Persian, and so in my culture, as in many cultures around the world, we have a tradition of using, we used multiple different things, but in this case, we used a certain type of coffee where you drink it, you flip the cup, the coffee grounds stay in the cup, but they dry and they create shapes and forms. And if you have an intuitive reader, somebody can kind of look into the cup and, intuit things about your past, present, and future. And so my grandmother was skilled in this art, and she taught my mother how to do it. And so this was always going on, in the background of our family parties or in our home. And I didn't really pay attention to it. I didn't even know what it was until when I started graduate school and I would go home on the weekends. My mom started reading my coffee. I would have coffee and just put it down, and she would flip the cup, dry it, and just kind of read it for me. And I remember thinking, okay, well, this is silly, but it's a bonding moment with my mom, so I'm just going to let her do it. And then I just noticed that the things that she said would come true, and she was more right than she was wrong. Not everything was correct, but I noticed that. So I started taking notes, as a scientist. I was like, well, let me just take really copious notes and start paying really close attention to if this is actually true, or if I'm like, she tells me something and I notice it and it happens. And if it's vague and whatever. And so I did that for many years. And my friends swore by it. They would like fight over who could come over to get readings from my mom on Sundays. They swore she was amazing. Over the years, I just realized, I don't know how it works. I can't reconcile it with my science. I can't explain it, but it works. And so I just lived in cognitive dissonance. I didn't bother to try to combine the two worlds. It just didn't. I couldn't, so I just ignored it. And then in 2016, my mom, 5 weeks in advance of some event, she kind of warned me in this like very serious tone, which she'd never done before. She was kind of like, I just feel like I need to warn you. I just, I see something that's a little bit dark. You might get some bad news. And she wouldn't tell me what it was, but I was kind of alerted to that. And by this point, I knew that it was usually right. So I was a little bit on edge for 5 weeks. And I kept asking, my friends, like, which one of you has bad news? And then eventually I kind of forgot. But then 5 weeks later, one of my professors at USC that he had helped me with an experiment during my dissertation, he was killed by one of our students in the program. And so, okay, obviously that was a very upsetting event, kind of shook our whole community. But I was really shook by the fact that my mom had seen. So I called her and told her, after I was like, I think I know what it was. And I told her, and she's like, yeah, it was a death, but it was very unusual. I'd never seen anything like it. So I didn't even know how to, explain it or describe it. And, she's like, I didn't want to say it and upset you until it happened, just to see if it was true or not. And so it really shook me. I kind of was like, what is this universe that we live in? How is it possible that so many weeks, basically over a month in advance, this information was out there and able to be picked up? Was it fate or destiny? Is there such thing as that? And so I just kind of spun with these questions. And I didn't do anything about it. I just continued my life because I had started a new job. I was busy, but it kind of just, planted a seed and shook me. And I took the coffee a little more seriously after that. And 2 years later, she saw this relationship coming into my life that seemed like it was going to be really, positive, and the outcome was going to be good and all that. And she was right about every detail except the outcome. In the long term, now I see it as positive because it caused all of these subsequent events. It caused me to write the book. It caused me to it caused my spiritual awakening. But at the time I was like, no, we broke up. This was devastating. She was wrong. Did something change? So I had all these questions about how exactly the coffee worked, or how time works, because if you can predict something, does that mean time doesn't only move forward? So a lot of these physics issues came up, and that relationship ending, I wasn't at a great place in my life to begin with. And so that was like the final, I think of it as like a life raft. I had kind of made that relationship like, oh, this is going to be, all my hope was put on it. And so when that popped, I was just completely lost. It was my dark night of the soul type of thing. I felt despair for the first time. I lost hope and optimism. It was just a very dark time because I started thinking, what is the meaning of life? What is the point of all of this suffering? And so that was kind of the tipping point. And so after some months of not doing anything but being sad, one of my friends was like, oh, why don't we go to a psychic reader? Maybe she'll give you some, I don't know, good news or some hope or something. And I was kind of still a skeptic. So I was like, no, I'm not going to go to a psychic. And my friend was like, you get readings from your mom every Sunday. What's the difference? Don't be so close-minded. So she knew this psychic here in LA that she had turned her away. She had turned my friend away twice because she couldn't read her energy. So she's like, oh, she's ethical. She won't take your money if she can't read you. And she's really, really good. So we went, and then she was really good. She blew my socks off, and I was weirded out because I'd never had a reading like that from someone I didn't know. And it was creepy, it was kind of creepy. But I got curious, and my other friends were, and I think everyone's sort of like this in mainstream Western culture. It's like you might believe or you don't believe. You don't really know what you believe because the mainstream says it's not possible, but then you might have an experience that you can't explain. And so you're kind of in this in-between world of believing and not believing. And so me and my friends were like that. And we're like, let's just see. So we went for fun. We went to a bunch of different intuitives and psychics, got a bunch of readings. Over the course of a year, we swapped readings to see if they were saying vague things that applied to all of us. And, it turned out they weren't really vague. They would say really specific things. They'd be correct on multiple, like 7 variables for some event, some specific event from your past or your present. And it was just kind of inexplicable with the current with my paradigm, my scientific paradigm. I couldn't explain it. And so that intrigued me, and I didn't do anything. I still didn't do anything. It took me a while to actually do anything about it. I was just kind of interested. And the tipping point, this is the final tipping point, was when I actually started doing some reading. Was I was serendipitously just listening to Chelsea Handler's the last book she wrote, which is called Life Will Be the Death of Me. And she made this 6 or 7 episode limited series podcast about the book. And it's not about spirituality or anything. It's actually about therapy. So it wasn't related at all. But on one of the episodes, she had Laura Lynn Jackson, who's a psychic medium. She had her on. And in the readings I had gotten, the intuitives had started mentioning karma and reincarnation and soul lessons and things that I wasn't familiar with and didn't believe in at all. I wrote down what they said, but I didn't have a mental framework for that at all. So I didn't understand. But I was listening to the podcast, and Laura Lynn Jackson starts outlining the exact same spiritual framework. And she's like, oh, Earth is like a school. We come to learn lessons. You have soul groups, etc. And I kind of perked up thinking, oh, this is what the intuitives had said to me. So I listened carefully. I wrote it down just because I thought, oh, let me go back and look at the readings and see if this makes more sense to me now. Not that I believe it, but I was just curious because I had never heard it before. And then on the podcast, they also mention Chelsea and Laura Lynn Jackson mentioned Brian Weiss's book, Many Lives, Many Masters. And so, they mentioned this book and they're like, it's great. It's a psychiatrist case study. Everybody should read it. But they didn't say what it was about. And I just thought, oh, sounds great. So I ordered it. Like, I'm always looking for books to read. Then I thought, psychiatrist case study, cool. So I ordered it. It arrived. I started reading it. And, it's about past life regression. And so, of course, I'm like, what am I reading? This is weird. But the psychiatrist, Brian Weiss, is, he was a skeptic. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in it, but he tells this incredible story of how, one of his patients he couldn't cure, with traditional psychotherapy or traditional methods, he's able to cure her of anxiety and various phobias through this past life regression. And so from a mental health neuroscience perspective, I was really interested in that healing part of it. And then on top of that, he also describes in the book that through his patient, these alleged master spirits spoke through the patient and explained to him the exact same spiritual framework that I heard Laura Lynn Jackson explain and that I heard the intuitives I had seen explain, which is that Earth is a school, you come to learn these lessons, etc. And so I was I was interested because I'm like, wow, this is the 3rd time I'm coming across this spiritual framework that I've never heard of. And now it's coming from a well-credentialed psychiatrist, not from an intuitive. And I just was kind of fascinated. And he in the book talks about how he went on to, go to the library. He couldn't have been the first behavioral health practitioner to come across this. So he goes searching for research, and he mentions a bunch of researchers in his book. And so that was kind of the kickoff of, I was like, what is this information I've never encountered before, And so I just started digging in to the literature and just reading as many books as I could about past life regression, about near-death experiences, consciousness, reincarnation, all this kind of stuff. So it kicks off that was the reading portion. I started reading, and then eventually I started interviewing intuitives and psychics and mystics and scientists, because I wanted to know what they think. And this was really just for me to figure out the universe. It was like, I just want to know what the hell is going on. What is this crazy thing we live in? And also, is our scientific paradigm wrong? Does time not flow forward? Like, what is the nature of consciousness? So I just started getting into this world and asking questions, and ended up eventually flipping my worldview. But as I mentioned before, it was kind of a crisis, and it was a long journey to do that, because it's just a lot of information, and it's really, really hard to flip a worldview, without thinking you've lost yourself.
Well, I thank you for going and explaining all that, because it's so interesting. Once you start diving into this, it is a lifelong journey. There's no, as they say, there's no shortcut to the path of enlightenment. So
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
so what does your mom think about the curiosity that you have developed around this topic?
Oh, good question. My mom's always been spiritual, so she's always sort of talked about these things in the background. And I feel bad now, but we used to roll our eyes, my brother and I, kind of like, oh God, mom's, being spiritual again. That stuff's not real. And then, after I read a lot of books and spoke to so many people and read studies, I was like, wow, there's actually, possibly some truth to this. And so I think that I should probably ask her, huh? I think she's probably happy that I've opened up to it. But she's never said anything, about it in that way. She's always been very understanding either way. And I don't think it bothers her. I think both of my parents are very much respectful of other people and their beliefs and their journeys. And it's always been like that for us. Nobody's ever tried to force us to believe anything, or, they're kind of more accepting. So I think it was fine either way, but she's probably happy. I will definitely ask her when I see her this week.
Well, it's interesting. Just, it seems that you are in the perfect environment to be able to develop these types of questions, because not all families do that.
Yeah.
A lot of times when you have families, they have a spiritual belief or a spiritual, any kind of religious belief, they really kind of stick with that. But with your family, there's this great openness. So it allows for these types of questions and for you to take different paths should you choose.
Yeah. And I'm grateful for that. And because I think, you're right. It can be, there can be a tendency in families, to want everybody to believe in the same thing, because wouldn't that be nice? It would be nice. But I think my parents were very kind of chill in that way. And I am very appreciative of it. It does allow for you to feel more adventurous, I think, in your thinking, like you're kind of like, okay, well, if anything's possible, then I can explore.
And thank goodness for that. Yeah.
Yeah,
We get to explore and decide what really resonates with us and is true for us.
absolutely.
Well, and so you mentioned that you've done all these interviews. Is there one that really kind of stands out for you? Because it sounds like you had some really great discussions.
I think that they were all great. I've had so many, but one of the first ones that I did with an intuitive was really interesting because, and I just, now that I'm kind of I wrote about it and I'm thinking about it, I'm so appreciative that she was so open with me and, didn't edit anything she said with me. But I had known her for a little while, and she was very, very, very intuitive. And I was curious about her background, before I got into all this, I thought, okay, do all these intuitives learn this spiritual framework in psychic school? Do they all, get trained in the same way? Or do they grow up in families, as we just talked about, do they grow up in families that believe this? So they're raised in that tradition? And what I came to learn, not just through her, but I put her story in the book, was that, she grew up in a family that didn't believe in this stuff. They didn't believe in her abilities, which must be terribly invalidating and isolating. But they didn't believe in her abilities. They weren't spiritual at all. And when I asked her how she learned about, the spiritual framework, she's like, oh, one day my spirit guide came to me when I was 5 years old, in the middle of the night, and explained everything to me. And this was the beginning of my journey. So I was a little taken aback by that. I thought, okay, that sounds weird to me because of my worldview. But the interview with her really was a moment where I thought, I am going to suspend disbelief and I'm just going to listen with curiosity. And I don't think this person's crazy. And, I'm just going to listen. And she continued to tell me, a lot of other crazy stories. Some I may have put in the book, but one was, she, at the end, she mentioned offhandedly that she's seen fairies and jinns or genies, or I don't know, gnomes, maybe, things like that. And I remember, again, that was another moment where I was like, oh no, she's actually crazy. but again, I had to keep stopping myself and being like, okay, well, you know what? Let's just not do that and just listen, and just give her the benefit of the doubt. And I'm glad I did that, because as I got deeper into it anyway, I just realized that we're asking the wrong question. We keep asking, is it real or not? And it's not a very smart question to ask. So eventually I got over that, although that question is what, caused my whole crisis and plagued me for months and months. But eventually I got over that. I was like, this is just not a very interesting question to ask. And so I'm glad I stayed open-minded. But that was one of the most interesting interviews, just because it was one of the first ones. And I was just like, what am I listening to? But, it's interesting. And again, I'm glad I stayed open-minded. I was also surprised that most or all of the scientists that were my colleagues that I spoke to were really open-minded, about everything. They didn't necessarily have any spiritual beliefs themselves, but some of them did, some didn't. But they were very open-minded, well, science definitely doesn't know everything. We can't explain everything. There's, a lot we don't know. There's a lot of mysteries, and anything's possible. And it was through those conversations, I was just reminded of the principles of the scientific method, right? Which are curiosity, staying open to possibility, paying attention to the outliers, because those are the data points that can make or break a model. And that's how I started to think of it, is a lot of these are outlier data points, a lot of these anomalous, unexplained events, but you can't just ignore them. In science, in statistics, you can't just ignore a data point that doesn't fit the rest of the data. Those are the interesting ones. Those are the cases that can help you really figure something out. So the scientist interviews were very helpful too.
Well, it's good to hear that the science community really was very open to that, because I think a lot of times people would consider that not to be the case.
Yeah. Again, these were conversations we had in private, so I don't know how open and accepting I'm sure they'd be more cautious in their language if we were speaking publicly. And it's kind of interesting too, because it's a lot of them will use the language of, similar to, yes, we need to be open to possibility, but as soon as you start mentioning specific phenomena that they are conditioned to, wince at, like paranormal or parapsychological or psychic, then it gets uncomfortable. Then I feel like people get more uncomfortable. And I've been very interested in that as a phenomena, because I've witnessed it in myself. And, I've witnessed it in my colleagues when I speak with them. But I think it's it's just a nice reminder that sometimes we just become conditioned to things. We, create biases and shortcuts in our mind, and you just think psychic, bad, fraud, or whatever it is, because it saves our brain energy to do that. You don't have to continuously assess and reassess everything, but it doesn't always serve us, right? And it is useful to stop and question a lot of your innate and conditioned reactions to things. And that's what I had to do on this journey. So it's been a learning experience.
I would say that. I would definitely say that, which is exciting. I think we all have our learning experiences. How has this shifted your view of the universe at large, just in our place within it?
Yeah, well, in the mainstream Western worldview, the scientific paradigm, we're taught to believe that the universe is random and meaningless, and it doesn't contain any meaning in it. Anything that is meaningful comes from our human brains. Is exactly, that's what we're taught. So it's honestly a very I've come to view it as a very cold and kind of cruel worldview, because you're left to your own devices, right? The world is cruel and meaningless, and the suffering that you're experiencing, it's up to you to create meaning out of it, because there's no actual meaning in it. Which, first of all, we don't know if that's true or not, so that's not even accurate. We don't know, but that's the assumption. And I used to view the world in that way, and I came to realize that is really part of what was causing a lot of my suffering and why I was having an existential crisis. Because, as I mentioned, the question that kept coming up in my mind as I was going through this dark time was, what is the meaning of all of this? Why do we have to go through this? What is the purpose? And when you look to your worldview and the answer is there is no meaning, but good luck finding something to make sense of it, that's not very comforting, and it just spins you into more despair. And so, through all of this, and sometimes it takes something like that, right? Like, I would never have been open to any of this stuff. So it took such a drastic tearing down of my walls to let anything else in. And it was in that despair that I was like, well, whatever I've been doing and believing isn't working for me. So let me get curious about what else there is. And that's why I was curious about the spiritual framework. I was hearing about, karma and soul lessons, reincarnation, kind of like a Buddhist spiritual framework, because suddenly it was like, okay, I have this situation in my life. What am I supposed to learn here? And that's a really useful psychological reframing of a situation that helps you, right? It helped me drastically rework the way I think about day-to-day situations, everything in my life. It really helped me just do a quick reframe of, wait, instead of why is this happening to me? Just asking instead, what should I be learning here? Or maybe instead of seeing myself as a victim of a random, meaningless universe, being open to the possibility of, well, what if, you created this life for yourself beforehand? What if you chose these challenges for yourself because you knew you could handle them? And it's a very simple reframe that, for me anyway, greatly reduced my suffering, and it kind of just helped me, just think about things differently. So I think that was the biggest and immediately most useful thing that happened. And then I needed the scientific proof, though. And I was like, well, I can't just believe something, because that's just not who I am. And that's not how I've been trained. Is there any truth to any of this? And that's when I went, on the whole journey to try to find scientific papers and all that and that's because I was also thinking, if you could prove psychic phenomena was real, then is what they're reporting about the spiritual framework real? And, it's not necessarily true, but it is it's a bridge. So that's how I thought of it. And that's why I went searching for that. And so, yeah, now I do think there's meaning in everything. I think it's embedded in the universe. And that's what I found on this whole journey, like through personal proof and experience and scientific, the books and papers that I read. That's what I believe now. And it's really greatly helped me, face day-to-day things.
It's so interesting when we look at life in that way. And I just love that question when we, kind of question what it is that we're experiencing. And is it possible that something that we are learning from, like, what can we learn from this that really changes the whole dynamics of whatever's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. It really helped. And I was surprised at how valuable it was. I really was genuinely surprised because I thought, I was very anti spirituality and religion. I thought those are, I didn't see how they were comforting, probably because I just never needed it. But yeah, so I came to realize how valuable it is. It's a very valuable mindset. It helps a lot.
Yeah, instead of the universe doing things to us, there are actually problems to be solved, or we can look at it in a kinder and gentler way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, sometimes this is funny. Sometimes the intuitives would say the universe isn't doing it to you, it's doing it for you, which I still sometimes cannot get behind. I'm still like resistant to that, but that's what they say.
Yeah, I could see that too. So, like, what do you mean for me?
Yeah.
I just lost my job. How can the universe be doing that for me? But, it's interesting. They've always got that saying, a door shuts, another opens, so there's possibility in everything.
Yes. Yeah. And that is what they mean. And when you look back, it's, on your life, things work out most of the time, or you see how, something that seemed bad at the time becomes positive later or causes something more positive to happen. So, but when you're in the moment, it can be hard to remember that for sure.
So, what is the takeaway from this part of the story that you want people to, in society as a whole, just to really kind of grasp and understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think first of all that there is some pretty fascinating evidence, showing that we're more interconnected than we think we are, with the current mainstream Western worldview. Like we're much more interconnected than we think, and that there's a lot of meaning to be found. So I also think that the scientific method, which is fantastic, I'm still behind it. Um, it is only one way of knowing and being right in the world. So I think that a lot of the wisdom traditions have ways of knowing that we've abandoned in Western culture. And like I came into encounter with this face to face from my own Persian heritage, but I think that a lot of that has been abandoned in Western culture, and people can be shamed for it, for turning to these ancient traditions, because it's almost like anything ancient or other is not worth knowing. And I just don't think that's true. And I think it's time to end that narrative and bring back these other ways of knowing. Because I do think that there's more information and meaning to be found in the universe. And so I I guess that's the main thing. It's really to encourage anyone, but in the book, I invite scientists in particular to, try to get in touch with the mystical and numinous aspects of the universe, because they're there. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, through meditation, through getting a reading, take, psychedelics wherever it's legal. There's a lot of chanting, dancing, drumming. There's a lot of different ways people use to get into these altered states of consciousness, to get in touch with the mystical side. And I think that once you experience it firsthand, it's just a completely new understanding of what you and I are talking about here cognitively, like just logically, rationally. I think it's a whole different dimension to understanding that. So, and I think it's necessary. And it's also healing, which I write about in the book. A lot of these methods are very healing. And so, we should support them and promote them as a society.
Do you find that um, people can also get to these places through meditation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Breath work, meditation. There's a lot of avenues and routes that are available. So, it's like take your pick, whatever suits you. Because yeah, with something that works for one person may not work for another. So
You just have to get out there and try different things and see what resonates.
yeah, and it does take a little bit of I guess, a little bit of an explorer mindset, which is what I found myself in, in the past few years. But it's not an unpleasant explorer adventurer mindset. It's a nice one. So I really encourage it. I think most people who embark on that type of thing come out of it, enlightened in some way, right? Like with a broader awareness of what kinds of experience they can have while they're living. So, and other ways to find meaning, through events or, through our environments. So I really think it's very kind of like a useful activity to go through.
What do you think about science and spirituality? Have we gotten to this point in human history where we're starting to at least have that bridge so that they come together?
Well, I found a lot of scientists, philosophers, historians, Nobel winning physicists who are working on this problem. So, by the way, finding a lot of those types of people really helped me on my journey, because I thought, oh yeah, really smart people are thinking about this, trying to come up with models. They've written numerous books on it. I think there's some work being done on it for sure, but I still think there's a lot of stigma around it, which is what I'm hoping to help reduce. Because these are typical human experiences that everyone has. We've just, arbitrarily labeled them as exceptional or impossible human experiences, but they're not. Everyone has them. They're very typical. So, kind of destigmatizing those things, paying attention to them and talking about them openly can help us, help bridge the worlds more efficiently. I also think that because of psychedelics, which are having this, renaissance moment, all this resurgence in funding and research activity, psychedelics force us to look at consciousness. And, there's lots of reports in the literature of these transpersonal or quote unquote paranormal events happening on psychedelics. So they help bridge that world. They can help bridge that world. And I think that because of psychedelics, there's a lot of research centers being opened up for to investigate consciousness and all of these things. So there is a little bit of momentum, but I think there's definitely a lot more work that can be done.
It just seems so interesting, all the work that you've compiled for this. And it's research like yours that helps bring this to the forefront so that we can start having these really open conversations about spirituality, spiritual phenomenon, and also just science as well, because I just believe that it's all coming together in many ways.
Yeah, I hope so. I also, yeah, I think that our model is probably incorrect since it doesn't account for a lot of these phenomena. So, of course, another natural consequence would be that we could actually come up with a model that helps explain, these outlier data points. We're not working with a complete model, so imagine if we could complete it. Yeah, there'd be so many great advancements. So we should get there.
Earlier, you talked about healing. So, how does healing become a part of all this?
Yes. So the healing part is actually what kind of drew me in with the past life regression, right? I was just really interested in how, because in neuroscience, we don't have great models of mental illness. The worlds of psychiatry, psychology, and neuroscience are kind of separate, even though maybe from the outside, it might seem like they're very connected. On the inside, they're very disconnected. So we don't have great models for these things. When we learn about the brain in neuroscience, they don't teach us anything about the mind, or about clinical psychology. So what I found interesting about the past life regression work was that this woman comes in with all these anxieties, these phobias, these incurable, up till that point, personal disorders. And what cures her was telling this story and reliving the emotions of it and having this emotional catharsis, like a release of emotions. And just to quickly, for people who haven't read the book, the psychiatrist regresses the patient, says, go back to the time of your trauma. And she starts retelling a past life. Like she has this fear of drowning and she starts retelling this life where she's like, there was a huge flood. I drowned in the flood. And then in the session, she'll kind of relive the drowning, she'll cry. But there's this emotional release. She comes out of the session, she's cured of her fear of drowning. And so one by one, he did this with her and her fears were cured. And so I did a bunch more research. There's so much, it's not research because it's clinical psychology or psychiatry. So they're treating patients, not doing, randomized double-blind studies, but there's thousands of these cases. And what I came to learn as I dug in, and psychedelics are also very healing because they get to the root of the issue. So a lot of these altered states of consciousness is what they're called, right? These kind of regressive states or psychedelics or on meditation or doing breath work, they kind of get your conscious mind out of the way and let you access some of that unconscious, emotional, traumatic things, whether from this life or other lives or whatever. It doesn't really matter, right? What if the past lives are metaphorical? It's not the point. It's besides the point. The point is whatever comes up can be released and you can be healed in some way from either an emotional or an interpersonal or a physical condition. That's what the literature shows. So I don't know. I mean, the explanation I gave, getting your conscious mind out of the way and having access to the subconscious, that's one explanation. There's other various explanations like spiritual ones. But I think, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really matter. It works. It's very healing. And I think that that's really important to highlight because we do have this mental health crisis. We don't have great treatments. Pharmacological treatments are less and less effective for mental illness. The pharmaceutical companies have largely abandoned even creating drugs for mental illness. So we find ourselves in this difficult situation. And it's like we have these healing modalities that have been used, across cultures, countries, and across time. So we should tap into those.
Well, I'm so grateful that we were able to spend this time together, Mona. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Yeah, my website is monasobhaniphd.com. And you can, I write a newsletter on psychedelics and altered states. So you could sign up there for that. And I have links to pre-order the book. It comes out soon or order it depending on when you listen to this. So most of all my work is there on my website. That's probably the best place, but it also has links to my social media on there.
Well, Mona, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Mona. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Proof of Spiritual Phenomena, a neuroscientist's discovery of the ineffable mysteries of the universe. Proof of Spiritual Phenomena is available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And of course, you can also pick this up at the publisher Inner Traditions at innertraditions.com. Make sure to support our indie bookstores, and if it's not on the shelf, ask for them to order it. Again, you can visit Mona's website at monasobhani.com, which is Mona, SOBHANI.PhD.com. Sign up for her newsletter, be part of her community, and explore what the world of spiritual phenomena means for you. If you'd like to learn more about this book and other great books in the Moments with Marianne book club, visit momentswithmarianne.com. There we have listed books in every genre with plenty of inspiration for your next great read. I'd like to take a moment and thank everyone who's taken the time to write into the show. We appreciate all of your comments and feedback and love to hear about the books you're reading and what we should know about. If you'd like to suggest a book, visit Marianne Pastana, and there you'll click on Contact Us. We want to hear from you. Let us know that you'd like to be on the Moments with Marianne monthly newsletter where we share giveaways and special events. We're going to pause here for a quick moment to share our sponsor. We'll be right back after these messages. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.